you've heard the name Peter Rice mentioned just once or twice already today. Eric and Ernie, no, it's Eric and Peter. Peter Rice has been the chair of SHAAP for a long time, until just less than a year ago. And over that time, he and Eric have worked together in every aspect of the work, perhaps specifically most particularly the MUP work, but every aspect of SHAAP's work. Then, just as Peter was coming towards the end of his tenure, when he perhaps thought he could put his feet up a little bit, along came COVID. And suddenly there was a whole lot more work to be done. And SHAAP found itself at the forefront of having to very quickly respond to a changed environment for people at risk, and trying to help them in this new situation. And Peter's going to say a little bit about that as an introduction to his work with Eric. Peter, you're very welcome.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much, Alistair, and just great to see so many pals on the call. Not a surprise, I'm confident that people would turn out for Eric, but it's terrific to see so many people. But yeah, I mean, we had done a few things, some of which you had heard about, but and Eric's quite good at looking ahead and anticipating what's going to happen, but he didn't anticipate the global pandemic. But we needed to show some nifty footwork. So from that kind of starting off as a bit of a nuisance, meaning that we couldn't go to a meeting in Dublin, it then emerged this is actually something much more substantial and much more significant. So really from the middle of February through to the middle of March, it became clear what an impact the COVID-19 pandemic was going to have on alcohol services. Alcohol services are a very people-orientated business. You might do a bit of prescribing here and there, but it's essentially a human interaction business, and the pandemic, just by its very nature, interfered with that. So we very quickly pulled together some guidance, and Eric was the main author of this, on what are the practical measures, social distancing and so on, that services need to put in place to safely operate. And that was probably done within a week. And we then put that out. But it then became evident that, in fact, there was a bigger problem, that the services, in fact, were just not there. And if they were there, they were being closed down for a number of reasons. Alcohol services seemed to be particularly at risk of being closed down. Some of that couldn't be avoided. Spaces were needed for other roles in hospitals and so on and so forth. But it became clear that a lot of the services we were writing guidance for, in fact, were just not going to be there. And so that really meant that we just shift our focus to writing guidance not for workers, but for people themselves. And that was partly driven by a flurry of guidance and information and things that were being said, particularly on social media. And some of that guidance was frankly not very good. In particular, the guidance to don't do anything about your drinking. If you're a heavy drinker, just stay put. Services will be back soon, and just keep going the way you are. Now, from the work that we'd done on mortality, a report that had come out a year before, we knew that actually achieving cruising altitude was a very difficult thing for a lot of people to do. We'd found that 1 in 6 people who had attended the Royal Infirmary with alcohol withdrawals were dead within a year. So this idea that people could safely stay where they were until help arrived was just not realistic. So in discussions with Eric said typically, well, we need to crack on and do something about that. So we got busy, and along with Eric and my friend and colleague Shona Anderson, who's still in clinical practice, which she kept reminding me of, that I'd been out of that for a while, we really got to knuckle down and just wrote some guidance that we hoped would be helpful for people who knew they were drinking more than was good for them, who were a bit worried about making changes, and just trying to put in place some structure and help for people to deal with that. Now, some of this was quite tricky to write. There's a guidance going to come out on alcohol, how to help with alcohol problems from Public Health England for the 4 nations come out shortly, and that'll be hundreds of pages. So trying to kind of boil things down to something that's easily understandable and digestible is difficult, because sometimes you need to make decisions, and services aren't perfect. And I think that was Eric's real contribution to this work, was to say, this isn't going to be perfect. We can't cover every eventuality. Sometimes we need to go into cut through what the guidance is on what the perfect service should look like, because the perfect service isn't there. So some institutions I know really got lost in the weeds on this and ended up doing nothing because it was just too complicated. And I think Eric's attitude of we need to do the best we can. We need to do something useful here. We might be prone to some criticism here, but it's important and we need to get on and do it. And so that's what we did in drafting out our guidance. And Michaela will talk a little bit about the Scottish Recovery Consortium's involvement with finalising that. But it's a really satisfying thing to work on. There was a reference in a leader in the British Medical Journal within a month of the guidance going out. I reviewed a paper from India about 6 weeks after the guidance had gone out that referred to this guidance that had come from Scotland, and I don't think I'd ever been involved in anything that had such a quick impact. And I think it's ended up being the most downloaded thing that we've ever done actually in SHAAP. And I like the thought that probably the most downloaded thing that we've done was advice to the public, was advice to people. Actually, not advice so much to professionals, although we have heard from services that have found that it's been useful for them to use as well. But one of the great things about it was working with the Scottish Recovery Consortium, and over to my pal Michaela Jones, who's going to talk about SRC's work in this publication.